Hi everybody, and welcome back to another Look Back review. This time we're looking at a game that effectively turned me into a fan of the industry, Final Fantasy VIII. I first saw this game in action when my older cousin brought over his brand new PS1 and a copy of the game. I remember that day so clearly. The graphics blew me away, the sound and music rang through my head for years afterwards, and the gameplay, well, it seemed easy enough for even me to pick up and play. I wouldn't get to play the game for another year or so, but when I did, I played the heck out of it. I mean, I didn't fully understand what was going on or what to do, but I'd easily over 100 hours logged on the first disc alone. After getting a bit older and seeing it for sale in a PS3 digital store, I bought it again and made it all the way from disc 1 all the way to the end of disc 3 and, actually on a few occasions, to the last dungeon on the start of disc 4. But whenever I got here, I would just sort of give up, thinking I was never good enough to even try and fight the last boss, so just start from the beginning again. Only when I bought it again for the Switch on its launch day of the 3rd of September 2019 did I finally beat that final boss. For the first time as well, after playing the game on and off for around 20 years. It's always one of those games I'd played multiple times, loved but never beat. So what better to do than give you a review of the game and the new remake and tell you what they got right, what they got wrong, and whether it's worth playing over the original. Final Fantasy VIII was a game that was made very quickly after Final Fantasy VII was complete. In my opinion, it boasted much better graphics and visuals over 7. The 100 plus team worked hard to create individual backdrops for every location in the game. They even split the art teams up and made them work on their own to ensure that each place had a good mix of culture and diversity across all the locations in the game. The teams even admit that the jump in technology and techniques from Final Fantasy VII was massive, using a new style of mapping textures to models, giving each character a much better presentation. Once the game released, they compared the sales of the game to Myst, one of the biggest games in scope of pure size at the time. They stated that Myst had sold over 4 million copies over 4 years. Final Fantasy VIII, however, had sold over 3.5 million units in just 1 month, and that was just in Japan alone. The game is a love story. We see our main antagonist Squall, a very regimented and logical soldier, falling for the head of a rebel group called Renoa. The game also touches on issues of identity, as Squall starts to question what he knows as the game progresses, making him realise he can't just rely on himself or the rules and regulations he knows if he wants to save those he cares about. To take a step back, the world is split into lots of small countries, and 2 larger countries called Galbadia and Esfar. Whereas Galbadia and Esfar have huge military powers, Esfar has hidden itself away from the rest of the world and doesn't venture out nor allow other people to visit its cities. As we start the game, Galbadia is looking to speak with all the other countries and try to make a peace offering to work together moving forward. However, most people know this is a lie and what they really want is world domination. Nobody is sure what they want to do with this power, but it doesn't take Galbadia long before they start attacking other countries and making moves to do this by force if necessary. This is where we come in. We are from a small country called Balan, and from what's called a garden. There are a few of these in the game, and a garden is the name of a school or academy that trains young soldiers to work as mercenaries. We take up contracts from other countries and private clients, while staying neutral in the wider world's politics and agendas. We aren't your typical gun for hire, however. Soldiers of Garden, or Seeds, the elite soldiers of Garden, are a much more honourable organisation from what you might think when you hear the word mercenary. For a long time before the game starts, and for a while into our adventure, this works out fine, until circumstances force Galbadia to take aim at Garden, accusing them of trying to assassinate the president of Galbadia. After this, we go on an epic journey, and watch Squall turn from a newly promoted Seed and the leader of his own small party of characters to taking on the world's superpowers, while also stopping a plot of an evil sorceress who's leading the Galbadia military and playing a much more evil plot altogether. We watch Squall go through these changes needed to not only get the job done, but open up and rely on his other party characters just as much as they rely on him. With that, let's move on to characters. Squall, to start with, is a rather sarcastic, cold character. Clearly scared of letting anybody close to him, he bats away any form of friendship or help from others. He's a very skilled and logical fighter, following the rules set out by Garden even to his own detriment. Cypher is Squall's rival, and has been there ever since they were both brought to Garden at a very young age. Quick to anger, but not without the intelligence and skill to follow through with it, Squall and Cypher have spent years trading blows back and forth, which can even be seen in the game's intro scene as they fight during training. Quistis, Squall's young teacher, is someone who we see mentor Squall for the first part of the game. Although very smart and capable in her own right, passing all the exams given to her with flying colours at a very young age, this young teacher still has the same worries of any teenager, which can stop her from expressing her true feelings to those close to her. Zell, a loud, bare-knuckled fighter who fights with his heart on his sleeve, has a much more simple look on life than most of the cast. He fights for those he wishes to protect, like his family and friends, and those who can't defend themselves. Selphie, who like Zell, has a more light-hearted approach to life, is the sort of person who'll go out of her way to put a smile on anybody's face. She has a bubbly personality, and is much more of an in-the-moment kind of person, not dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. Because of this, when she does put her mind to something and focuses, she proves to be a tenacious and vital member of the team. Renoa is someone who holds her ideals and other people's well-being above even her own. Not originally from Garden, nor a natural fighter or even a trained soldier, but she isn't afraid to speak her mind and make sure she's heard regardless of the consequences. The sort of pole opposite to Squall, she and Squall clash to start with, before realising they both want and aim for the same thing, even if it means they go about it in very different ways. And lastly is Irvine, a sharpshooter with a slightly corny attitude to life. He fronts a confident persona and wastes no time hitting on any attractive woman he sees. On the battlefield, he's focused and puts those skills to good use, although sometimes he can buckle under the pressure placed upon him without any help from Squall or the others. The characters are one reason I do think this game is worth coming back to. The game's writers did a great job of even giving them some personality through conversations and some wacky, over-dramatic animations during cutscenes. Although a little cliche at times, they are multi-layered and prove to be a lot more than what meets the eye. While I do think games like Persona do this a lot better, it was one of the first games I played and it left me thinking about the characters after I turned off the console, and it made me look at people differently in real life. Even now, I still think it provides a relevant story and journey worth playing through today. Lastly in this section is presentation. I love this game and the nostalgia is almost unbearable right now, but I'll do my best to be fair. So one thing to compare when going over presentation is to look back at the original. What changed, what got better and what suffered. For visuals, the first thing I noticed is the updated character models. In the original, Squall had a slightly different hairstyle, which has now been updated to match the much more recent Dissidia games of which he appears in. While only minor and of course a lot better than the original, it's not the same Squall I grew up with. It's not a massive change, but it is something to note. Second is the clearer textures across the rest of the game. While the backgrounds look like they haven't received a massive update, the game as a whole does look a lot nicer to play through. It's slightly brighter, a lot smoother, and I think it's a very good attempt to bring the game forward to a point where new players are much more willing to pick it up and play. The animations of some things like limit breaks are still restricted to using the frameworks of the original, so do look a bit dated. But overall, I think it reaches a good balance of both capturing the original art style and modernising it for newer audiences. The menus also received a very small amount of work, just upgrading the text to make sure it was easier to read. It would have been nice if they could have overhauled the system to make it a bit easier to navigate. I mean, I have no issue going through all the menus and submenus to get what I want, but things like separating your items into subcategories, like healing, weapon upgrades, magazines, things like this, would have been a lot easier for newcomers to understand what everything does. For sounds, it's sort of a mixed bag. The music is as amazing as ever. The battle music, the boss music, the background themes, all the open world tunes are all there, just as amazing as I remember them back on the PS1. However, we do get a few sound glitches when we use that speed up function. While nothing drastic, you can sometimes hear a few sound effects playing at normal speed, overlapping with each other while playing at times 3 speed, which can sound, well, a bit chaotic. Like in most RPGs, grinding comes part and parcel of these kinds of games. so it's a shame that it affects something that, well, you're going to be doing a lot through your playthrough. With that said, I'm happy to say that all the songs for me hold up. They even sound great coming out those tiny speakers on the Switch. Final Fantasy VIII is a classic turn-based RPG, set in a fantasy world although leaning more into the realistic setting than your standard fantasy RPG. Our journey relies on our understanding of the magic and abilities we unlock as we play, to get through those boss encounters and get more and more freedom to the rest of the world. As you progress, you begin to have access to a few cities and areas before giving your own mode of transport which allows you to, well, travel just about everywhere. You can then fight more powerful enemies and take up side quests as you go. I really liked the progression of this, as it felt like I'd do a mission, get to see a little bit more of the open world, fight some cool new enemies, go visit a town, speak to some NPCs. When I'd done what I wanted to do, I'd then follow back up with a story, do another mission, get a little more access to the open world, and so on and so on. The gameplay mechanic that makes Final Fantasy VIII so different from any other turn-based RPG is the ability to junction magic to certain stats. In the game, you can acquire these Guardian Forces, or GFs for short. Along with a mighty attack you get when you summon them, they have the ability to junction some of the magic you get onto your stats. They often only cover a few stats each, so you'll find yourself equipping a few to each of your characters to make sure they're covering as many stats as possible. Depending on the stat you're trying to improve, the type of magic you choose will also have an effect on how much it will increase. For example, setting a low strength healing spell will increase your maximum HP more than a low strength fire spell would do. You also have another layer on top of this with how the magic works in the game. Magic is no longer a skill you can upgrade. Instead, each spell is treated like a one-use item and you can stock up to a maximum of 100 at one time. However, if I decide I need to use a cure spell in battle, I can do this, but any stat attached to that magic will be affected. So if my HP stat is increased by 500 when I have 100 cure magics, when I use one cure magic, my maximum HP would go down by 1%, so my new maximum HP would be 595. But it also works in reverse. If I had a spell like fire on my physical attack and I only had 20 of them, if the enemy I was fighting had that same fire magic spell, I could draw that from them in the battle, up to a total of 100, and each time I drew more magic, my physical attack would be getting more and more powerful. This is meant to be a risk versus reward mechanic, as often the most powerful magic will raise your stats the most, but then you're disincentivized to use it as it will negatively affect your stats. I hated this when I was growing up, and wished that after you gained 100 of any magic it would just sort of max out, and allow you to use that magic without it affecting any of the stats it was junctioned to. Unfortunately, it's still not the case in the remake, and I really do think they missed a trick by not doing this. Every enemy will be holding some magic of some kind, so drawing from every enemy at least once to see what they have is always worth doing. Some bosses will even be holding other Guardian Forces, so make sure you check this by drawing from them whenever you fight them. The strange thing is, Final Fantasy VIII has a bit of a weird difficulty system, which if you follow what the game is telling you to do, which is to get the best magic possible, can soon see you becoming very overpowered. So the enemies in this game will level up with you, the idea being that if you're level 50 and they're still level 5, it wouldn't be much fun or a challenge. However, you only gain very small stat increases when you level up. So the game becomes about getting that powerful magic, but also staying as low a level as possible. The magic itself doesn't scale either, so if 100 of a certain magic increases your HP by 5000 when you're at level 50, it's going to increase it by 5000 if you're level 5. You can stay a low level a few different ways, like by running away from fights as soon as you've got all the magic you need, avoiding as many wild encounters as possible, or the best method is for this handsome GF to learn the card ability. This will become a battle command, and once learned, after dealing out some damage to an enemy, it gives you the ability to turn that enemy into a playing card. Not only can cards often be refined into very powerful magic, if you card an enemy, you won't receive any experience points for the battle. I discovered this by accident when I was younger. I love playing the card game Triple Triad. I think it's super addictive and genuinely one of the best mini games in an RPG I've ever played. I wanted more cards to play with, so I spent the majority of the game carding every enemy I could. I started to realise then that some bosses I'd fought on other runs were still using low strength magic attacks, and were often being killed in just a few hits. I gave it a Google and had my eyes opened to what the game designers had designed, only to see me abusing it by accident. Don't get me wrong, feeling overpowered in an RPG is one of the best feelings in the world, but if you do feel the game ever becomes too easy, go fight some random encounters and level up a bit. The game will soon catch up with you. And if I'm honest, being rewarded with high stats felt like a great reward for knowing how the systems can be used and applying my knowledge to the game's mechanics. If you do feel you're struggling to deal a lot of damage to the enemies, that's when those GFs provide another use. Once summoned, they unleash a powerful elemental attack. Some can even inflict status ailments as well. As a kid, getting a new GF and seeing it summoned in battle for the first time was always a really exciting experience, and I'm glad to say the remake with the new upgraded textures doesn't disappoint. Apart from battling, you do have some dungeons to go through with some light puzzles that need solving. And when I say puzzles, it's often just go from point A to point B while pressing A a few times on some interactable objects, so to call it a puzzle might be a bit generous. Navigating through the dungeons themselves is often the only puzzle to solve, and I'm happy to say it was never difficult enough to halt my progress for long. Due to the older game design here, if you do see a save point, I would recommend you save. If all your characters fall in battle, it's an instant game over. You'll have to reload a past save to continue. For controls, the buttons are used well. It's a turn-based RPG, so it would have been a massive effort really to get this wrong. The camera in the open world though is linked to the R1 and L1 button, and I'm not going to lie, it was a pain to deal with. Luckily, you don't have any time-sensitive or important gameplay sections that this affects, as the cities and dungeons you visit all have fixed camera angles, but navigating the open world could use some improvement. I mean, it's a remaster for current gen consoles. I have 2 thumbsticks, we could use them. Last thing here then is to cover those 3 special abilities you get with the remaster. Times 3 speed, 0 encounters, and God mode. In a game where the focus is either on drawing magic or grinding of any kind, I'm all for the ability to fast forward. As I've played this game a few times, fast forwarding through conversations I've already seen is a massive plus. 0 encounters can be a little dicier. Some players would say that by turning this on, it ruins the original experience. And I wholeheartedly feel those players are freaking nutters. You can even get the ability to do this with a GF quite early on in the game, so if you feel like you want to turn the random encounters off, then do so. I would always say that when going through a new area, do try fight a few enemies to get their magic and, well, see those cool enemy designs. But if you're backtracking or you just want to plough through to the next part of the game, then you do you. Last is God mode, so this gives your characters full health and instant access to their limit breaks. This one I do feel is cheating a little. If you do what the game encourages you to do and get savvy with the magic system, have your GFs learn the abilities to refine magic and items, you shouldn't ever run into a brick wall. I do feel like this is one of the easier Final Fantasy games, so going into God mode on a boss feels a bit overkill. Some people, myself included on a few runs, even play with the characters permanently in critical health, just to give out massive damage with those limit breaks. The idea of only getting access to these while you're at low health does help keep you on the edge of your seat, and it's a balance of risk versus reward. Although going up against some weak random enemies just to see what those limit breaks look like and do, that's something I absolutely encourage you to do. I realised after writing this review, the gameplay sounds like it hasn't aged well, but I do think that after you understand all the ways you can acquire magic in this game, through drawing it from enemies in battle, refining it from items and cards, it becomes a great game with a killer soundtrack, cool looking monsters, and an interesting storyline that shouldn't be missed. Along with the improvements like speed up and removing random encounters to help you blast through the story, it's a game that's got a massive bang for its buck. It may have taken me the best part of 20 years to complete it, but when I saw those end credits roll, I was surprisingly impressed. I thought the game would fall far short of my expectations. I mean, 20 years is a lot of hype, but for a PS1 RPG, I was satisfied with Squall's and Renoa's and the rest of the gang's journey. With any luck, we'll even get our own remake or even a sequel in the future. Well, a person can dream, can't they? Thank you very much for watching. I hope everyone is doing well during this crazy time we find ourselves in. I hope you're all staying safe and hope this has distracted you for the last 15-20 minutes or so. If you would like to subscribe to my channel, very much appreciate it. If you have liked the video, please do pop a like down there. And if there's anybody else you think might be interested, please share it with them. Let them watch it as well. If you've got any comments on what I've said or your experience in the game, do pop it down below. I'm going to try my best to get back to everybody who comments. But just thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.